Thank you very much for coming today, for coming from many of you from Vancouver today. Thank you so much for coming. It's an important day, and one we haven't done here in the legislature in a few years. I'm honored. My name's Adrian Dix. I'm BC's Minister of Health. I'm honored to be on the territory of the Musqueam, of the Squamish, of the Tsleil-Waututh First Nations today, and today is an important day. We're recognizing Journey to Freedom Day in the Legislative Assembly of British Columbia. It's sometimes called, for many of you, will remember it or think of it as Black April or Black April time, but in Canada we've recognized since 2016 this day from the Parliament of Canada as Journey to Freedom Day. And it reflects, as it says, the journey to freedom of many now Vietnamese Canadians from Vietnam via places such as Indonesia and Malaysia and Hong Kong and other places where there were refugee camps to Canada in the period in particular, between 1979 and 1984, although people came before and people came after those times. As all of you know, on April 30th, 1975, the Vietnam War, sometimes seen as the 10,000-day war, ended. And the consequence of that for many people who would have hoped for the benefit of peace was no peace, but political, economic, and social repression. And the consequence of that was that in the years after 1975, more than 2 million people fled Vietnam, more than 1.2 million of them fleeing on boats in some of the most dangerous escapes that the world has ever seen. It was the largest refugee issue of its kind in world history, of its kind. And the experience of people who had to leave, 1.2 million, 250,000 of them, 250,000, according to the United Nations High Commission on Refugees, died en route. Died because they were attacked en route, died because of the circumstances, died because the boat sank, died because it was an impossible journey, not always greeted as it should have been by the world community. It was also, and we want to acknowledge this, a very significant moment in Canadian history. Up to that point, often Canadian immigration history had been defined by our worst moments. We think of the St. Louis, we think of the Komagata Maru, we think of other moments. But that changed in this moment because Canadian society opened our country and our hearts to Vietnamese people fleeing Vietnam, and we benefited from that action by the extraordinary contribution of the Vietnamese Canadian community. What made it different was more than half of the people who came to Canada were sponsored by private organizations, often churches, other religious organizations, and other organizations across Canada. My wife, Renee Sackler's here, her church, and her dad, who was a minister of that church, sponsored people from Vietnam, such that 120,000 Vietnamese refugees settled in Canada in the years between 1979 and 1984. That was the journey to freedom. And nobody has benefited more than from Canada. We are grateful of the contribution of the Vietnamese Canadian community and grateful of everything that's been done since then by the community. I'm the MC today, so I'm going to tell you a little bit of what you're going to hear and who you're going to hear. You're going to hear from Premier David Eby, who will say a few words first. You'll hear from the spokesperson for the official opposition, the MLA for Richmond North Centre, Teresa Watt. You'll hear from the House Leader of the Conservative Party, Bruce Banman. And then you're going to hear from an extraordinary artist, and you'll see some of her art here, highly recognized artist Crystal Fan, who's going to deliver some remarks, and we're going to look forward to hearing from Crystal. And then we're going to hear from Edison Tran, the Vice President of the Vietnamese Professional Association of BC. Both of them will speak to family experiences and community experiences along the journey to freedom, both as it took place and then afterwards. So it's a real honor for me to introduce, first of all, and just to say to people who've come, we have a lot of MLAs here from all political parties. Michael Lee is here from Vancouver-Langara. We have Sheila Malcolmson. We have Harry Baines. We have Henry Yao. In addition to the Premier, I'm looking around. We got Ann Kang over here. We got Susie Chant over here. We've got Aman Singh right in the front row. Of course, he'd be the last person I'd see. We've got Norm Letnick, the MLA for Colonial Lake Country here. George Chow, the MLA for Vancouver Fraser View. And of course, the Speaker of the House. You can tell he's the Speaker of the House because he's dressed the best. Right over there, the Honorable Raj Chauhan. So with that, it's my honor to introduce the Premier of British Columbia, the Honorable David Eby.
Thank you. Thanks so much, Adrian, and thanks for the introduction. Many of you will know that Adrian, in his role as the MLA for Vancouver, Kingsway. I was doubting myself. My brain was saying Kingsway, and I was like, that can't. As the MLA for Vancouver Kingsway has been such a good friend to the Vietnamese community in Metro Vancouver for a long time. He didn't just buy that tie this morning. He has worked closely with the community for a long time, and I just wanted to reflect on and appreciate that work that he's done over the years, supporting the community, and express my appreciation for it on a day like today, on Journey to Freedom Day. It's hard to think of something scarier than leaving your home country, facing persecution, bringing your kids with you, bringing your parents with you, uprooting to a place where you've never been, and doing so in some of the most dangerous, threatening methods of transportation where so many people died along the way. The courage of those who took those steps to protect their families is something that we're really marking today. And then, on arrival in a new country, to rebuild and not just make a living for yourself and your family, but contribute to the country in a way that makes life better for everybody. This is the story of so many Vietnamese Canadian families in British Columbia. There's one specific story that stuck with me, but the contributions are across a range of fields, everything from science and technology to education, to business, politics, the arts. But I want to tell a story about a contribution in the field of sports. There was a family that fled Vietnam and ended up in Skeena, in a small village in Skeena, in fact, in Hazelton, British Columbia. Now, I'm trying to imagine leaving Vietnam and ending up in Hazelton. That must have been quite an arrival. But they were sponsored by United Church in Hazelton, mom and dad. There was a daughter, a son, and an uncle, a family unit that traveled together that found themselves in Hazelton. In Hazelton, they had another girl. It was close to Christmas. And so they named the baby girl Carol. Christmas Carol. Pretty nice. Well, Carol grew up in Hazelton, and of all of the sports, started doing wrestling in high school in Hazelton. And it turned out that she was an amazing wrestler. Not only was she an amazing wrestler, but in 2008, Carol Wynn was recognized in the Olympics as being the best female wrestler in the entire world. She won a gold medal for Canada. And then that was in Beijing. And then 4 years later, she won a bronze medal for Canada. Carol's story, the story of her family, the story of the pride that all Canadians felt when she was standing on that podium representing her home country of Canada, that is the story of resilience, of hard work, of determination, of courage, both for herself, but for her family, and for so many Vietnamese Canadians, and on that day, every single Canadian right across the country from coast to coast to coast. So thank you for joining with us to celebrate those brave, those resilient, those remarkable families who make this province better every single day. And it's my honor to join you on this remarkable day commemorating that historic journey made by so many people and all the contributions made by the community since then. Thank you very much.
For all of you who are just joining us, don't be alarmed. It moves up and down on its own. It's all good. It's my honor. Teresa was saying that she once worked for me, you know. She doesn't mention that too often, so I thought I'd throw it in there. Teresa Watt is the opposition critic for many things, and she'll explain that. She's also the MLA for Richmond North Centre, and I'd like to welcome Teresa to join us.
Thank you, Minister Dix, my former boss, and really thank you for Premier Eby, for sharing the amazing story of Carol. That really is a testament to the Vietnamese Canadian community's contribution to our beautiful province of British Columbia. And before I read out my official statement, I just want to say that between 1979 to 1984, as Minister Dix noted, I was still in Hong Kong. I immigrated in 1989. I was working in the media. I went to the Vietnamese refugee camp. Some Vietnamese refugees stopped over in Hong Kong before they are heading to the States or Canada. So I talked to a lot of Vietnamese there, and I was so shattered by their journey. And also there are so many talented Vietnamese so-called refugees there. And they are either professors or scientists or very capable business people. And I'm glad that I'm now here in a really multicultural and diverse province, and we can work with every ethnic minorities coming all the way from all over the world. And today, as we gather to mark the Vietnamese refugee journey to Freedom Day, we honor, as Premier said, the courage, the hard work, and resilience of the Vietnamese community. This day reminds us the profound journey many undertook in search of liberty and peace, shaping the rich multicultural mosaic of our beautiful province of British Columbia. This is a journey of courage, of tragedy, of triumph, and of perseverance. Let us continue to learn from these experiences and uphold the values of freedom and human dignity that unites us all. On behalf of the BC United Caucus, in my role, as Mr. Dix said, let me explain, as the official opposition shadow minister for multiculturalism, anti-racism initiatives, arts and culture, I extend my deepest respect and gratitude to our Vietnamese Canadian community for your enduring contribution to our province. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'd like to now introduce Bruce Banman, the House Leader for the BC Conservative Party, to say a few words.
Thank you very much. My name, as mentioned, is Bruce Banman, and my grandparents were refugees. They escaped from the Russian Revolution. They were Mennonites who would have, had they stayed, most likely been killed. My grandparent on the other side was English. And the first thing that he did when he got here is he opened up a bicycle shop because that's what he knew. And he came from a very poor area of England, and he was always amazed that he was able to open up a business here. And the bicycle shop actually is important because one of my absolute favorite people in Abbotsford is Dow Tran. Dow Tran escaped Vietnam. And he came through Hong Kong, and then he came and he worked in a bicycle shop because that's what he knew. He did that for a number of years until the bicycle shop was sold, and then he opened up his own bicycle shop. And every single time that there is an election in Abbotsford, Dow runs for council. And I see the ladies back there in their Canadian flag dresses, and that is very much what Dow is like. Dow is so honored and thankful to have come to Canada, that Canada, as it has done for refugees after refugees after refugees, opened up its arms. He is so thankful, and he is one of the most generous people that I know. And he does it quietly. If there's someone that needs a donation, somehow Dow always finds a check. And I think that my city, British Columbia, Canada, is so much better off having Dow and the rest of you here. It adds to not only the fabric of our country, but it adds to the humanity and the spirit of what makes this country so special. And I just want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for the journey that you went on. I understand it, even though I did not live it. I lived it through my grandparents' stories. And 40 years after they came here, they could not talk about the horrors that they saw. And I think the one thing about here is that this is a country that everyone can come and live in peace and be successful, worship how they want to worship, and most importantly, vote how they want to vote. So thank you so much for being here, and thank you for coming to Canada. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bruce, and the stories that people have referred to. We're going to hear now a couple of family stories from two really remarkable young people, and I wanted to first of all just note the work of Crystal Fan, which you can see on either side, and the work that she's done. I wanted to tell you that she's an artist and a second-generation Canadian. Last year, her work depicting Vietnamese Canadian families was acquired by the Royal BC Museum and featured in the reopening of the third floor, which many people in Victoria will remember, helping remind British Columbians of the importance of immigration history and its impact on our cultural identity. Her work is also currently on exhibit at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria, for those people who have the opportunity to go see it, in what the Globe and Mail called one of the top 5 Canadian visual art exhibits for 2024. It's my honor to introduce Crystal Fan.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Minister Dix, for the introduction and for Premier Eby for hosting this event. I'm so proud to be here. But honestly, I didn't really know anything about my family history until 2017. My parents never spoke, and I think this is very common. Parents never spoke about it. They just wanted to live their life. And I didn't actually learn about where my family came from or try to be an artist until 2017, when, out of necessity, when I was actually at the Royal BC Museum and I was looking at their new exhibit. It was called Families, Bonds and Belongings, and it featured Canadian families. So I walked through this and it was a beautiful exhibit, but I didn't see my family there. I didn't see any Southeast Asian families represented in that exhibit. And so I asked the curator at the time why we were missing, and she said, "Oh, we just don't have those objects, we don't have those stories." And I remember seeing in the exhibit these beautiful old style portraits, family portraits. I was like, "Oh, I can do that." And so I started learning how to paint. And in 2019, I started my first exhibition, painting everyday Vietnamese Canadian family scenes. I started learning my parents' history, and I recognized that this ability at then the age of 37 to completely switch careers and have the support of Canada, through the Canada Council for the Arts and the organizations provincially and locally, to make that shift. I recognize that's a great privilege that my parents would not have even imagined when they came here. there are a lot of things they couldn't conceive of. They couldn't conceive that someone could go to university for 9 years and not become a doctor. But I did it. I did it. Thank you. Thank you. But when they left Vietnam, escaped Vietnam in 1980 and landed at a refugee camp in Pulau Bidang, they were 20 years old. They were uneducated, come from a small, very isolated rural village. They didn't really know much about the world. And they applied for asylum in all sorts of countries. And the reason why they were rejected from most countries, because they wanted to stay together, was my parents, my mother's 2 brothers, and a 9-year-old nephew. And Canada was the only country that would accept them as a group. And despite all their challenges, one of them, a lighter challenge, being that coming to Victoria, not understanding the language, the culture, the traditions, they would go to save money. They would go to Woolworth's Dollar Days to get really cheap tins of seafood to eat, only to later learn that there was cat food they were eating. But mostly, when I interviewed them about their memories, it was all about the kindness of the other Canadians that they encountered, including the housekeeping staff at the Strathcona Hotel, where they stayed the first few months, the Chinese business owners in Chinatown who would deliver rice to their apartments and give them free food. The ESL teachers at Camosun College who they loved, who were hilarious to them. And the countless friends and volunteers from the churches and nonprofit organizations who volunteered their time to integrate my family as Canadians, many of whom were immigrants themselves from Germany, Portugal, the Ukraine, and remain friends to this day. And so for me, those kind of recollections and the fact that we're gathered here today remind me or signal to me that the very best parts of Canadian identity, of being Canadian, is humanitarianism and multiculturalism, such that 40 years later, it's shaped, these are such powerful forces that they've shaped the way my parents see themselves as Canadians today, such that they were able to now themselves sponsor 2 families, an Iraqi family and a Ukrainian family, to Canada. And that I could shift gears and become an artist and really focus on representing Vietnamese Canadian experiences in a very Canadian way in which we can all relate to. Like, I'll just point quickly to this one behind, which is really, it's not about a Vietnamese family, it's about maybe the Vietnamese Canadianness is the context, but the story is a couple that's annoyed with each other. And I feel like that's something that we can all relate to, right? So I wanted to create art that binds us through our multiculturalism, such that the next generation after me can walk into the institutions like the Royal BC Museum and the Victoria Art Gallery and see themselves represented and really feel like they belong to this community. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Crystal. And we have just people might want to know about Crystal. We have some cards here, which we'd like to share at the end about your work. And thank you for that, for your testimony to your experience, which is, as we know, it can be a very unique experience. It's my honor now to introduce Edison Tran. Edison is a Vietnamese Canadian who was one of the boat people, sometimes called boat people, after the Vietnam War ended. He left Vietnam as a baby in 1978, and his family was at a refugee camp for almost a year. His family was welcomed to Canada when Canada opened its borders. That was in 1979. He grew up in Langley, BC, and has since moved to Vancouver after earning a degree from UBC. He has served on the board of directors of the Vietnamese Professional Association of BC. Say hi to Q Tran for me. And for the last 3 years, and supports the community when possible, including hosting a radio show and podcast for the Vietnamese community during the pandemic. Thank you for that, Edison. He's an entrepreneur in Vancouver, and his dream is to unite the world, and based on his extraordinary experience and his extraordinary life, he's in a good position to do so. Welcome, Edison.
All right, thank you so much, Minister Dix and Premier Eby for organizing this event and the general public for coming out. I think sharing stories is very important because it unites people, helps people understand where we're all coming from. And so, yeah, I live in Vancouver, and when I was actually connected with the VP ABC, I actually was able to actually connect with other people who I can relate to. Because I came over as a baby. And my story today I'm going to share is a story of gratitude. And even though I was a boat person, I was 2 months old when we left. So even though I lived that experience, I don't know anything about it personally, really. I can only understand it through stories that my parents and friends and family actually share with me. And so my dad, he was a prisoner of war for a number of years. And my mom had to save enough money to actually buy a boat so that we can actually escape Vietnam. And so when my dad got out, obviously my mom just had me. I was 2 months old. And I can't even imagine what they were thinking and feeling. But in the middle of the night, we fled. And at first, my dad actually didn't want to bring me. He's like, well, he's only 2 months old. Let's leave the boy behind. And if we make it, if we survive, we'll just bring him over. And of course, my mom just had me. She's like, well, if he doesn't go, I don't go. And so my dad's like, okay, fine, bring the boy. I was like, okay, thank you, Mom. Because, she just had me, and obviously she couldn't leave me behind. And so they had to leave everything behind. Because if they tried to sell anything or any hint of leaving, they would be captured, might be tortured, put in jail, numerous amount of things, consequences. And so the stories that my parents shared with me was that we were out at sea for 10 days. And on the second day, apparently, the boat's engine died. And I was like, what? And I can't share all the stories, but I'm like, that's just crazy, because there's so many different threats, including pirates, who would, come and, just do horrendous things. I can't even imagine. And the fear of the people on the boat. And for me, I was a baby. And so that was a very dangerous situation, because if a baby cried, I might be able to give away a position. But apparently, my friends were telling me that they probably just gave me like sleeping medicine or something. So I was like, okay, I thought I was a good baby, but okay, it was just the sleeping medicine. But anyways, we were able to go to a refugee camp in Malaysia. And when Canada opened up its borders, we actually were sponsored to come in, and we arrived in Edmonton. And it was cold. Hey, we had to make a new start. No English, nothing. And we actually stayed there for a few years, moved over to Vancouver, and eventually in Langley. And so when we moved to Langley, I was 7, and my mom, with her sewing skills, we ended up actually opening up a small business from home, tailoring business. And with that foundation, they were able to work hard, scrimp and save, and actually create a great life for me and my brothers. And, I don't know, for me, I'm like, is it really worth it to risk your life? Like, literally risk your life instead of staying in a communist country? And for those who fled, the answer is yes. They could not imagine living life with no freedom, no choices. And I'm just so grateful that my parents' generation were willing to sacrifice and to risk their lives, and mine too at the time, to be able to give a better life for their children and for those in the future. And I'm very grateful because they give us opportunities. I was able to learn the guitar, play some sports, be a part of a community, and felt that I belonged in Canada. They were able to give me a better education. I was able to go to UBC, earn a degree, and now I'm an entrepreneur in Vancouver. They were able to teach me values like gratefulness, humbleness, resilience, grit, perseverance. And I think that's in all of our genes. All humans, I believe we all have that. Sometimes we have to go through certain challenges to actually see what we're made of. And so for me, I'm grateful to be alive every single day because of my journey. But even more so, living in Canada, and the freedoms that we have here and the opportunities, every day, I am so thankful. For me, I don't really believe in killing and war, but I'm so grateful that it happened because it allowed the opportunity for my family to be here. Because without the war, I probably wouldn't be here. So there's always a positive to everything if we choose to look at it that way. And so for me, this event is really a great reminder of the sacrifices that my parents' generation went through, the risks that they took. And why? To give us all an opportunity to live a better life. And I can never really repay them except with the life that I live, and to show them, hey, you know what? Your sacrifice and the risk that you took was not in vain. And that's pretty much my story. I'm grateful to be able to share it. But if I can add one more thing as well, is that my belief, even though I'm here representing the Vietnamese community, my belief is that we are all one family, the human family. Sometimes we have certain messaging that tries to divide us. Maybe, I'm Asian, you're white, or you're Christian, you're Muslim, or, different parties. But at the end of the day, we are one family. And hopefully we hear stories like this to remind us that, we are just humans living a human life. And if we can have some more love, some more connection, understanding, and patience, my gosh, what type of world can we create? Thank you for allowing me to share my story, and I love you all.
Thank you so much, Edison. Thank you for those words. And I just want to acknowledge the many people who are here. We felt it's important in our discussions with community leaders who said to me when we met to discuss this event, how important it was for young people to speak today. Events of April 30th, 1975 happened 49 years ago. Next year will be 50 years. Can you imagine it? And there are many people here who experienced those events and then experienced the trip, and it had everything from war to political repression, to the decision to leave, to courage on the seas, to massive, unprecedented tragedy, to the boredom sometimes and violence of refugee camps, and then arriving in Canada and having to live in a society which was welcoming but had challenges. This is one of the most extraordinary stories of Canada. And I'm very honored to have people who have shared that story with me over many years. I want to acknowledge a few other people who are here. So my colleagues, Nikki Sharma, the Attorney General of British Columbia, is here, right over here. Janet Rutledge, the MLA for Burnaby North, is here. The Parliamentary Secretary, the MLA for Vancouver-Kensington. A lot of Vietnamese Canadian people in Vancouver-Kensington. Mabel Elmore is just over there as well. And we'll have an opportunity afterwards to get together. Here, there's food being offered, and it's from Elisa's Pho on Quadra Street. The Premier has eaten there, so he before every event tries the food before we present it to a wider populace. So it's good to see that. But it's great food, and we hope to come together and spend some time. And then we're going to do a flag raising outside. I'd like to say do one more thing and thank one more person, Teresa Ho, who works in my office. She's taking a picture over there. I have really good ideas, and she makes them happen. And I want to finish by just asking everyone to rise for a moment of silence for everyone lost, whether before 1975 or afterwards in the Vietnam War, everyone lost on the high seas, everyone lost on their journey to freedom. If we could all rise and have a moment of silence. Thank you very much. Thank you for coming today. Thank you for joining us. And let's break some bread together and hear more stories from all of you. And thank both of you for your extraordinary contribution. Thank you very much.